right, now we are recording. And we are with Sean McConnell from Episcopal Relief and Development. Delighted to have you with us as our special visiting speaker this month. And delighted to get to record this for those who aren't able to join us so that they can hear from you a little bit later.
Who's Joyce?
We've got, I believe, is that Joyce Abbott?
Yes.
Wonderful. So glad to have you with us this morning, Joyce. And I see Lisa Parker and Virginia Means, Liz Bull, Dick Bull, Susan Key, maybe even Michael Pratt. and Tag Mortisey and Denny and Barbara Olmstead. So thank you all for joining us. So Sean, do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, or?
Sure. And in the spirit of giving our testimony, yes. Which it was really something to hear Deacon Don's what he shared this morning. I think that's that kind of struggle is something that is something that we can relate to on different levels, and to hear him telling, especially the just the impact of a moment like he had in his pastoral care work, I think is something that is it has a lot of impact on others. It reminds me a little bit of the organizing method called public narrative, which has three different pieces: the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And the importance of telling your own story first when you're meeting with a group of people that you might not know, or you might be going to door and telling people about something very important for their community. Why would they listen to you if they don't know you? So to really share your own personal story first is an important piece of that organizing technique. The rest of that is the story of us. So what does that mean for us together? And then the story of now is, so what can we do about it? That reminded me of when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my father was the vicar of St. Stephen's Church in Jacksonville, Arkansas. And the ECW, the Episcopal Church women, would get together on Saturday mornings, and they would knit or crochet what they called leprosy bandages. And they were essentially gauze, like hospital gauze. And I would go with my mom, and my job was to roll them so that they could be packaged up and sent off to be sterilized. And this was in probably the late 60s or early 70s. And at that time, those gauze were sent off to a place that prepared them to then go to Southeast Asia. I don't know if they were used for leprosy or what they were used for, but they were. It was something that was very important to the formation of that women's group at St. Stephen's, and also to me. I felt like I was doing something that was going to have some kind of impact in the world. And so the organization that was doing that work was called the Presiding Bishops Fund for World Relief. And the Presiding Bishops Fund for World Relief at that time really was a world relief type model. It was a model of charity. It was a model that would take the funds that the Episcopal Church had that were brought together from the compassion of Episcopalians, and then share that throughout the world. And so that just has always been with me. When I was that age, we also had the little mite boxes. If you've been around the Episcopal Church for a while, you probably have seen the United Thank Offering mite boxes, but the Presiding Bishops Fund also had them. And so I always had the little box on my dresser and would put the coins in it. And the coins, I don't think ever made it to the Presiding Bishops Fund, because I would always raid the box and go buy candy. So I probably have my things to confess about that time as well. It's when I was working for the president of the House of Deputies, Bonnie Anderson. My job was to work with her on technology and putting together presentations, and she and I would travel around, and she would lecture, and I would run this kind of rather elaborate multimedia program behind her. And one of the things that she would lecture about frequently was leadership models. And this was in, I started working with her in 2009. And she was at that time talking about how this organization, once called the Presiding Bishops Fund for World Relief, now called Episcopal Relief and Development, had transformed the way it worked in the world to focus on partnership with Anglican partners throughout the world, and that it really was about expanding the capacity of those partners to be able to achieve the dreams that they had for their communities. And it was no longer the case that this was a charitable type of fund, but one of partnership and one of relationship. And so that really had an impact on me, so much so that that I left my job in the Diocese of California and went to work with Episcopal Relief and Development in 2013. So I've now been with the organization for almost 8 years, and it really has been for me a dream come true to have that opportunity to do that. And so, Robin, I want to put you on the spot. What can you tell me about Episcopal Relief and Development?
Wonderful. So I was just going to say, full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of Episcopal Relief and Development. And when I was a missionary for the Episcopal Church, I helped administer programs that were grant funded by Episcopal Relief and Development. So one was in Liberia. There was a large chicken project at the Cuttington University farm, and that I got to help with. And then when I was in South Sudan, Episcopal Relief and Development gave us all of the funding that we needed the seed funding to start a Department of Agriculture for the whole province, which was the Archbishop's vision for kind of bringing agriculture to. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I just switched my view and I lost you for a second, Sean, but there you are. So I got to work a lot with them at that point. And Episcopal Relief and Development was the first ones who introduced me to the concept of asset-based community development, which I was kind of coming to discover in South Sudan because we didn't have enough resources. It was kind of like, well, what resources do we have here that we can use? So it really opened my eyes to what I have found ever since then to be just both a more effective way to produce better outcomes in people's lives, but also a much more gospel-centered way of doing development work, because it's really about identifying the giftedness and the assets, the gifts that God has given each one of us, and how we can work together to achieve something that it is that God's calling us to do. But the newest piece of information that I remember learning about Episcopal Relief and Development is that over the last, maybe this is the last 3 years or so, there's been a focus on specific areas where you've discovered that you have the biggest impact as sort of like a niche area that Episcopal Relief and Development does better than most other organizations, and is able to really lean in and do more through both connecting with interfaith partners as well as the long history of the organization. And those areas are climate resiliency and gender-based violence and help empowering women. And the third one is early childhood education. Did I get them all?
Early childhood development is what we call that, because
yes,
the holistic pieces that include education, but also nutrition and care, and the role that different community caregivers play in helping children to develop. I'm happy to go a little bit deeper into that.
Please do.
I think that one thing about when I started this job in 2013, we were actually looking at at that time 23 development factors that were a part of our work. So the work was in international development was really shaped by our specific partnerships that were that were dreaming about what was possible in their communities. And so what we noticed was that things really did start to fit under certain umbrellas. So at that time, when we were doing everything from soup to nuts, one of the things that when I was in the New York office, I would spend a lot of time with my colleagues from the field, and they would talk about cross-cutting themes in the work. And so one of those cross-cutting themes was domestic violence, violence against women and children. So in a community where you might be working to improve the financial well-being of a family, or of of families, vulnerable families in that community, then and so that was what at that time was called a cross-cutting theme in the work. In our last strategic planning process, which began in 2015 and was launched in 2017, the move came to look at what were the three areas really where most of our work fit into. And so we started talking about our program priorities. And those priorities, Robin just stated very well. Thank you, Robin.
Well, it's much easier to remember now that there are 3 instead of 23.
I know, right? It makes my job a lot easier. And so I'm wondering if you can allow me to share my screen.
Absolutely. Hold on just a moment. All right, you should be good.
Great. So one of the things that I like to point to frequently is that I love the name Rippling Connections, by the way. That was a surprise to me that's what this moment is called. One of the things that that I think that we as Christians recognize is what it means to be in a Christian community. We come together to worship together, to pray together, to be in community together, and so that togetherness that really can become a little bit inwardly focused. So when I think of this, I've had many opportunities to be in a situation exactly like this one, and so in searching for what I really wanted to express, this is what I found. This is from the Brooklyn Art Museum, and it's Meredith Monk's dance piece called Cellular Songs. And so I'm just really
I can't
taken by.
See it. Can anyone else?
Yeah, we see it.
Oh, you see it. Okay, good. It must just be because I'm recording that I can't see it. Carry on. Okay.
So what it is, Robin, is did you see the last image of the people holding hands and praying? Okay. So that was what we typically see in the church, people grasping hands, praying in a circle, all facing inward. And this is a dance piece where the group of women in the image are all holding hands in a circle, but they're facing outwards. And so to me, this is really the call of relationship that Episcopal Relief and Development is inviting the church to continue in community, to continue in our connection that we have in community, but to turn our focus outside and focus outwards. Now, St. Mary's Napa is very good at this. St. Mary's Napa is very good at having a focus beyond the walls of the church. And so I think that it's something though that we need as a reminder that we can have we can still have our community, we can still have our connectedness, and we can be connected to the world beyond. So Episcopal Relief and Development, what is it? It is, first of all, I think it's you. It is the Episcopal Church working throughout the world to facilitate healthier, more fulfilling lives in communities struggling with hunger, poverty, disaster, and disease. We help communities to prepare for and respond to disasters here in the United States and globally. So we are known as an international development agency, and people ask, what do you do in the United States? The one thing we do in the United States is disaster response and disaster preparedness work as well. And then our global development work focuses on holistic programming around 3 transformative program priorities. And we've even clarified that more than what you said, Robin. Those focuses are women, children, and climate is the easy way for us to talk about those things. And so instead of all that
easier.
text, there was a lot of text on that slide, Robin, but I'm just going to go to this one. And usually I would invite somebody to read it. Is there someone who would be willing to read that for us?
Sure. Women. Our work with women focuses on helping communities promote the rights of women and children and move toward the vision that everyone deserves a life free from violence in a society where they are treated with dignity and respect. Only then can communities truly heal and thrive.
Thanks. Is it Denny?
Yes.
Thank you, Denny.
So
So this is exactly what I was saying, that when you are trying to work with a community, for instance, to improve, to help people move out of vulnerability and into more stability, there are many different factors that you would want to make sure are part of that. Education would be a factor. Access to good, healthy food might be a factor. Microfinance might be one way that you would approach doing that work. And so any of those things, when household violence is an issue, that tends to take on the major priority in the people's lives who you're working with, the program participants. So that is why we turned our focus to, let's work on that issue, that cross-cutting issue, using the different factors of development that we had developed expertise in over the years. Is someone able to read? Let's see, can I go to the next one? Children.
Sean, I'll read it. This is Tag.
Thank you, Tag.
Children. Our work with children supports and protects kids under 6 so they reach appropriate health and developmental milestones. This focus on early development is foundational and critical to helping children achieve their full potential as future contributing members of their communities.
Thank you, Take. This to me is, it's really the focus that most people in the church know us for in international development right now, especially because we have a campaign called 1000 Days of Love that is currently happening and getting a lot of attention across the church. I think that when it comes to international development, many people feel good about focusing on children. Which is a wonderful thing. I actually think that the backstory about the children piece is really helpful, and I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment to talk about that. When the HIV/AIDS crisis was at its peak, we noticed that in a lot of communities, one of the cross-cutting themes was that children were losing caregivers, and so a lot of the response that was happening from in the development world was to say, we need orphanages, so in other words, we needed to basically create facilities in which to warehouse these children. And so two of the development officers in Episcopal Relief and Development who were working in Zambia in a program that we were partnered with the Hilton Family Foundation on to recognize the needs of these children and to try to meet those needs. They started a campaign that was really a community-focused campaign. And it sounds very much, when you think about it, like that adage that that we all have heard over and over again: it takes a village to raise a child. But really, what this was recognizing was that that there are many different people in the lives of children in a community, in these communities where we were working in Zambia, who, if they had the tools, would be able to do the things that are required to provide appropriate nutrition, appropriate education, appropriate care, appropriate psychosocial stimulation for in early childhood, all of those pieces. And that when you do the work of kind of galvanizing the community around that, then the community will take on the responsibility for those children. So that program is called Moments That Matter, and is now in 16 countries beyond Zambia, and has its fastest growth in Kenya and Brazil right now. So that program is now recognized as one of the Hilton Family Foundation's one of their keystone projects in their work, and they are asking other NGOs to model their work after the work of Episcopal Relief and Development in integrated early childhood development, and we just say children. One piece about the women, the work that we do with women, most of that began in Liberia, and the program really did start to look at, especially in rural areas in Liberia, where religious leaders really are community leaders, that they could play a role in helping to reduce violence in the home. And so at the beginning of this program, there was a survey that went out, it was a part of the evaluation process that we were working on with two different universities. And they went and surveyed these rural communities and asked the question, to women, if you were a victim of violence in the home from your partner, would you go to church leadership? And the positive response was 5%, said that they would. So next, the program really moved towards helping religious leaders not only to understand how the community difficulties and how that type of violence causes breakdown in the greater community, not just in the home, and then really started working with them on scripture study, bringing them together in groups to learn from one another, and then teaching them to speak publicly and to even preach about what it means to respect the dignity of every human being. And so over time, then these religious leaders, which are men and women in Liberia, because the Mothers Union is a very powerful group in the church, and that is a powerful group of women. They started going out and speaking in communities about the problems of violence and letting people know that if there was an issue with violence in the home, that they could report to them. After 5 years, the evaluation happened again, and that number went from 5% to 87% of people who said that they would report to their religious leaders in the case of violence in the home. The other piece about that, and this is the piece that for me, I think has a lot of impact personally, is that this program has been so successful that in Liberia, our Muslim counterparts and Muslim NGOs recognized the program and said, we would like to do the same thing. And so working with Islamic Relief USA, we developed a similar program for Quranic studies for Muslim religious leaders in those communities. And one of the things that we are noticing is happening is that Christian and Muslim leaders are coming together to study together and to do that work together. That's a byproduct of the work that we're doing with women. And I think it's, to me, it's kind of one of those Holy Spirit type of moments of that type of work. And so we did women and we did children. Let's see if I can share again. And we have climate. Can someone read climate for me?
Sure.
Well, she
Our-
did.
Climate-related work focuses on how families and communities can work together to adapt to the effects of rapidly changing weather patterns. This work includes preparing for and recovering from climate-influenced events such as floods, hurricanes, and other disasters.
Perfect, thank you. And you're not Dick Bull. He's sitting next to you.
Yes, Liz, sorry.
Hi, Liz. Thank you, Liz. One of the things that many of us are aware of, I think, is that subsistence farming really is kind of the way that most people in the world get the food that they eat. Actually, 80% of people rely on subsistence farming for more than 50% of the food that they eat, or it's either that they're eating that themselves or that they're taking it to market and using that for income to get other foods. In many parts of the world, there has been the time of growth and harvest and the time that you have food, and then in some places, then what is called the hunger season happens. In a lot of places, as recently as a decade ago, the hunger season would go to be about 2 to 3 months long, and now in those same places, it will be about 4 to 6 months. So one of the things that we recognize is that is growing, and so our work with local partners and the development agencies that are affiliated with those Anglican groups that we partner with is to design programs that will be effective in the local context. So working with the members of the community, we're focusing on more sustainable and climate smart ways to grow food. And it really is about looking at drought resistant crops, diversifying crops, water management, land management, livestock management. And that's something that your rector knows something about as well, and has done good work in that area. A lot of what people will think when we talk about climate is that we're doing something to neutralize carbon, or the work that we know that some countries have agreed to in the Paris Accords. That is, to me, also a secondary piece of this work, because one of the things that happens is that one of the learnings is that a lot of climate smart agriculture is indigenous agriculture. So during the time of the great help of the West, and I don't want to say anything negative about Peace Corps or any of those times when we've gone out to help, but one of the things that we have done in our history is we've introduced new crops, new agricultural techniques, and chemical inputs and things like that into the agricultural systems in these countries. And one of the things that we're learning and is really starting to change how we're looking at food and subsistence cultural situations is that a lot of times those foods that we removed from their diet were actually much better for the climate and much better for the ground in those places. So a lot of what's happening is restoring these old agricultural techniques. Throughout the Eastern world, there where rice is a primary foodstuff, the techniques changed over time thanks to our own, trying to help people do better. And one of the things that especially with rice farming is that a lot of the chemical inputs that were used during the 70s and 80s and the last part of the 20th century really did deplete the soil's ability to help those crops grow. And so, and a lot of times in rice growing areas, crop rotation is not necessarily as easy to do as it is in other places. In India, an Indian scientist developed what is called SRI, the science of, or the system of rice intensification. And what that does is it reduces chemical inputs, and it has this kind of counterintuitive idea where they used to put a number of seeds into one mound to try and get as much to grow in one space as possible. And this is something that actually is an ancient farming technique that actually what they need to do is they need to spread each seed apart. And one of the things that's been noticed in places where there are typhoons, for instance, is that when you spread the seeds apart, that the stalk itself can actually grow thicker and bigger. And not only can a single stalk produce more rice, but it can become more tolerant to things like high winds and typhoons and the rain. So the stronger the stalk, the more tolerant the stalk is to those types of situations. And so really, I mean, it's interesting to me that it's got this kind of scientific name, the system of rice intensification. And what it is it's just using the old techniques to grow rice. And so on a trip that I took to the Philippines, I had an opportunity to go see the bishop's rice fields, and his neighbors thought he was crazy. That how can you grow rice in this way? You're putting less rice, you're putting less seed into the ground. You're not using the chemical inputs that we know we're supposed to use, and his yield actually ended up that the first year that he used SRI. Increasing by over 60% on the same amount of land that he had been farming for years. So, so the bishop using SRI became kind of like the SRI evangelist for the kind of the central part of Luzon, the island of Luzon. So I'm always really kind of captivated by these secondary things that happen.
Can
Yes,
I jump in with another fun fact about SRI? So the long kind of sort of generally accepted knowledge was that the only way to break yield records and continue producing more and more yield on a set, which is like the total weight of rice being produced on a set area of land, the only way to do that was with chemical inputs and hybrid varieties, which had been, the development through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And so that was just common knowledge that there's no way using hand techniques and subsistence farmers can get anywhere near that. And that's one of the arguments where they were trying to convert all agriculture, saying in the future, we're going to have to produce more food on less land. The only way to feed the world is to move in this direction. Well, SRI has over the last 10 years has broken yield records set by chemical and mechanical farming. And this is hand planted rice, using compost and really focusing on the soil and not flooding actually, or periodic irrigation instead of flooding all the time. So there's a lot of individual work. You can't do it using machines. You really have to have people in the fields. But the fact that it can break the yields, it was actually a lot of scientific journals wouldn't at first publish those articles because they didn't believe that it could be true. and it's just really remarkable the advancements that are continuing to be made in that.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the unfortunate things that I've seen is that there are campaigns against SRI. that are, of course, paid for by large chemical companies. So you see those billboards in some of the countries where SRI is being implemented. So that is women, children, and climate. Our work in those areas, and so that is our international focus. And I'm happy to talk at further length about the work of disaster response, but I want to stop and see if you have any questions about the international development focus.
I had a question. Can you hear me?
I can. Are you Martha?
I'm Martha, yes.
Hi, Martha.
How do you choose where to go? I mean, there is so much need in the world, and do you wait for a country or a church, a diocese to invite you, or what's the process about where you go?
So you're right on. We only work in places where we are invited to come, and usually by the bishop. It is almost always the case that the partnership is with an Anglican diocese first. So that request has to come to us from a bishop. One of the things that I was doing in preparation for 2020 was to prepare to go to the Lambeth Conference of bishops from around the Anglican Communion in Kent and in Canterbury. And it's unfortunate that did not happen. The preparation that I was doing was exactly putting together the communications that they needed to understand how to partner with us. And so that outreach still happens on our behalf because of our Anglican Communion office partners that help bishops know that they can partner with us in that way. It is frequently the case that I'm the one who will get a call that says, our congregation supports this school in Haiti. Will you work with us in our congregation to support that school? And our response is, well, we're currently working in Haiti, but that is something that would have to be approved by the Diocese of Haiti's development partnership. So they have their own development agency in Haiti, and so they set the priorities. And we always allow our partners to set the priorities where we work. Any other questions about the international piece of that?
I have a question about Chico, and when we gave money for the fires a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How does that money get distributed, and how do you know where to put the money?
So in a disaster context, our partner is the Diocese of Northern California. And I forget his name. Perhaps someone knows the rector.
Richard Yale.
Yeah. So so he is the one who really is the person handling the triage of that, and I'm not really sure what the status of that currently is, because there were a lot more funds that went into Northern California this past year because of the most recent fire season. But I know that he is the one who is partnering with the diocese to help with the distribution of those funds. And
all used for that purpose?
I'm sorry, Liza?
Are they all used for that purpose? In other words, we donate money to Episcopal Relief, and then that money, we're not really sure what happens after that. And is it all used up for that particular area?
So they can only be used for that purpose. Every partnership has to have its own audit every year. And then we are also audited. We cannot distribute funds anywhere else other than if they're designated funds. Some people give money to us that's kind of non-restricted. It's just they'll give money to us generally. And so we can then decide where those funds should go. But if we are having a, excuse me, if we're having a fund for a specific disaster, those funds cannot be distributed anywhere else. And so it is our partner, in this case, the Diocese of Northern California, who sets the priorities for those funds. And that's,
our church was a recipient of Episcopal Relief disaster funds after the earthquake in the very spot where I'm standing, where the Oregon pipes collapsed during the earthquake.
That is correct. And because we're all in Northern California, unfortunately, we know that we're probably going to have more distributions in Northern California. I saw a hand raise.
Yes. I'm Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
When you were here talking with us 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was in regard to building the assets of the church, not the financial or the stuff of the church, but our abilities. And I think we kind of stopped. I thought it was a fascinating discussion, and I want to know how we can get going on that and where we go with it.
So I do believe it did stop. I think that there were plans for it to go forward, and then the pandemic happened. The work that was being done was a product of members of St. Mary's who were attending, and I always forget the name of the course, but it's a course that the diocese offers on missional work for congregations. Can't remember what the course is called, but the project,
the College for Congregational Development,
CCD. I kept hearing CCD. Yeah, and my friend, your canon of the ordinary, was leading that program. I'm not sure where that was left with St. Mary's, but the project that St. Mary's was putting together was to identify assets and to start doing the work of figuring out what could be accomplished with those assets. What I would recommend, and this is actually the project that because of the pandemic, I'm starting with my congregation here in Novato, is we're about to start a survey project that is looking at the assets of individuals in the community first. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm sending out a survey that's going to ask a few questions. The primary question that we ask is, what do you know well enough to teach? And so with that question, you really actually get to not only skills, but people will usually answer that question out of their passions. And so the things that it's not enough to just know how to do something and how to teach it, but to also have some real passion about driving that forward is one of the ways to really activate people's gifts. So that's the main question we're going to ask. We're also going to ask some questions about language and we're going to look at the kind of the geographic circles around our church and look at who's the closest within the community in our church and where people are. But we're going to try to not make it a difficult survey for people to respond to, something that hopefully people can respond to in under 5 minutes. And then from that work, I'm hoping that we will be able to, again, soon go out into our community and start talking to our neighbors and asking them those questions. And then really finding out in our neighborhood what it is that people in our neighborhood see as the benefit of having an asset like an Episcopal church with the grounds and and all of the resources that we have available in the community. So really listening to our neighbors. My church is 3 blocks that way, and in our neighborhood, we are actually 66% Latino. The mean individual in our community is female, 37 years old. Spanish is her first language. At my church, we look very much like an Episcopal church. We have no Spanish language content. We are mostly white. And we are really kind of in a little, we were in a bubble in our community before the pandemic. And so now we are recognizing that we need to be in place in our community. I think that one of the things about outreach, that's why I have that picture of people praying and facing inward and then turning and facing outward, is that I really do think that it's very much like Deacon Don was preaching about this morning, that if we are called to make disciples, not to get political, but this quote has been hanging with me, that will lead by the power of our example and not the example of our power. That really had an impact on me when I heard that, and I do think that for us as Christians, we have the opportunity to show others who we are, especially, I keep thinking back to what the presiding bishop has called us to remember about what our role as followers of Jesus is, and that is not only to love one another, but to love across our differences as well. This has nothing to do with Episcopal Relief and Development, but it goes a little bit hand in hand with an announcement Robin had about the Sacred Ground program. There's another program that's also kind of alongside that has been developed by the presiding bishop's staff, and it is called From Many One: Conversations Across Difference. And there's really great information on that on the episcopalchurch.org website, right on the front page. I don't know, Robin, if you had an opportunity to read the presiding bishop's address to Executive Council from Friday. Did you have a chance to read that yet? You should.
No,
It's he really is now calling on us as a church to start those conversations across differences, and to do it from a place of love. So that to me is kind of a great call and a great opportunity for us. A real quick story about that, and then I'm going to stop talking, is that I was invited to do a booth at a diocesan convention at a diocese in the South, and the booth next door to me was the St. Andrew's men's prayer group in that diocese, and one fellow said to me, "So where are you from?" And I said, "I live in the San Francisco Bay Area." And he kind of got red in the face, and he said, "Oh, well, you live where Nancy Pelosi is. I don't understand how anybody can live there." And I thought about just kind of walking away, but I asked him, I said, "So how do you pray for her?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Jesus asks us to pray for our enemies, but I think that he also means those that we would disagree with strongly." And out of that just kind of, because he was there representing a prayer group, and he said, "Well, I've never prayed for Nancy Pelosi," and so we had this incredible conversation about prayer and praying for your enemies, and that was all we talked about at that point. We never, I made sure that I never mentioned Nancy Pelosi. I don't think he did again either. But it's something that I think that for me, the work of the church is reconciliation, and we're being called into this now more deeply than ever before. And so that's why I work for the organization I do. I work for the organization I do because we are continuing to share that love of that reconciling love of Jesus with our neighbors as far as we can possibly reach. And we can only do that together, working together. And so for that, I am grateful for you at St. Mary's and grateful for this time with you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Well, our theme for last year was the way of love, and this year it's going to be spoiler alert, because we'll talk about it in the annual meeting, but you heard it here first. We'll be meeting God in each other, and really leaning in. We're starting with this learning how to tell our stories in January. We're going to continue to build skills specifically in having conversations across difference, and I look forward to utilizing some of the stuff that that Bishop Curry has highlighted, but really a great step forward. And this conversation is a great reminder to me too of the way in which naming our assets, and especially I saw Liz's eyebrows go up when you started to say that, because we're planning a survey right now. And I was going to say, Liz, we've got to redo the survey and
yes,
those
I
questions.
just like, what do you know well enough to teach? I'm like, add it as a question to our interest and skills survey. Like, that's my plan for this afternoon, was to work on that.
Oh, so this just weaves so well into a lot of the things that we're already thinking and talking about, and I'm so glad that we got you in January, so that this conversation can help plant some seeds in us, in our hearts and in our minds as we continue to do this work.
I'm always glad to tee up an annual meeting. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks to you all. It's so good to be with you. I consider you my neighbors, since I'm just over here in Marin County. So it's always, I just cannot wait to be back in that beautiful building. I'm glad you're in there right now, Robin.
Welcome. Yeah, I came in here just so because I thought you might. Well, I suppose you got to see it on the service too, but I'm sorry.
It's absolutely wonderful the way that you're doing your service. I'm responsible for the technology at St. Francis of Assisi in Novato, and y'all are doing a much better job than we're doing. So
we definitely got some professional advice. Yes.
You have a rector who's smart enough to ask for professional advice.
And then use it.
Yeah, and then follow it, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
thank you, Robin.
Have a good week.
You too.
Thank you.